Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Inertia Creeps with me, Niall O'Carroll. Today I'm joined by two people who are working in an area that I'm particularly passionate about, and I'm very excited to have this conversation. Lolly first, ladies first. Dr. Lolly Mancy, Program Director at the Innovation Hub in UCD, entrepreneur, a woman who's had a fascinating career up to now, but is very passionate about neurodiversity and particularly understanding AI and what the future looks like. And Dave Cormack, who I suppose, Dave, you describe yourself as a dyslexic thinker, but you have been massively instrumental in making NCI, the National College of Ireland, a dyslexic-friendly college, and really challenging third level to think about the way kids learn and how we make third level education more accessible to the masses, I suppose. Dave also lectures in Trinity College. So we can go into that in detail, Dave, in a minute. But I suppose to start with, guys, I discovered about 6 months ago I've got ADHD, and it was something that was never really on my radar until I started doing some work for a company I was working with at the time. I was getting these speakers to come in and talk about neurodiversity, and I was learning kind of new stuff all the time. And then the more they were talking about ADHD, the more I was kind of ticking boxes in my head and realizing this is way too much of a coincidence. And it's fascinating to me because it's a world I knew nothing about until 6 months ago. And now it's hugely important in my life, not because I want the world to make allowances for me, but because I'm starting to understand so much about who I am, where I've come from, why I struggled in school, what my challenges were, and how I got to where I am today. And it kind of gives me then the sense of control and some sort of sense of the ability to pilot where I'm going next, which sometimes a lot of the stuff felt out of my control. So, Lolly, if I can start with you, I suppose to start with, tell me a little bit about where your passion for, I suppose, if you marry education, neurodiversity, AI, all these things came from.
I don't know where it came from to start with, but I think that if I can future focus for a second, that we will at some point in our present to future time realize that neurodiversity is a little bit like some of the other scales that we've looked at in the past, perhaps the Kinsey scale of the 1960s, where we were like in sort of binary opposition, you're A or you're B, right? And and I think what we're fast realizing now is the world has been developed for a scale, for this sort of polarity rather than a scale. Mm-hmm. So the education system, for sure, based on rote learning, from the Industrial Revolution, what do we need to do to educate people for particular roles? All of that has and is changing, but our education system has not caught up with this idea of different ways of understanding. So I think if you think that neurodiversity and neurotypical, I think they're a misnomer. I think we're all neurodiverse. I think we're on a spectrum, and at different times in our life, that can also change. There's an awful lot of women who are realizing that, particularly around the time of the menopause, that there's different experiences that they're happening, that it was possibly they're always there, but that they're manifested in a different way. We're certainly seeing, for example, if I take ADHD and hormones, is definitely a link there that's sort of very under-researched. And so what we're looking at now is if you take that idea that we all think and learn differently, then how can we accommodate that? So you talked about sort of accommodations, so this is not about having a sensory room in your university, or this is not about an inclusive or exclusive classroom. This is about the fact of where we're going, and the reason that AI comes into it, of the idea of a personalized learning experience. And I'm quite excited, but at the same time also I know there's a lot of challenges. We are we've, in terms of sort of AI and progress in terms of society, we're looking at industry first, and then government regulation second, and education third. So we're really falling behind in terms of what we need to be doing and what we should be doing, which is so exciting to see. There are change is happening, but they're not happening fast enough. And so a lot of people that are in the adulthood are realizing that they may be neurodiverse because their children are now getting diagnosed, and they're realizing, oh, that's very similar to me. We don't have any kind of the right infrastructure to help people experience, okay, well, these are the things that would help me. So, coaches and the medical professions and the education system, we've all got to be aligned, and we're very, very far from that.
Yeah, and that is a brilliant place to bring Dave in. And it is, like, Dave, I did a talk last year to a company who wanted to do something positive for their employees around neurodiversity. And the first question I was asked by the director of HR who set up the call was, are neurodiverse people better off working in IT? And I thought, this is not a great place to start from, or maybe it is a good place to start from. But from your perspective, with the fact that that is still a mindset, and obviously, like, I'm really passionate about making the workplace more human, and by human being more open to acknowledging difference. What was it that brought you to kind of really challenge, particularly, like, I mean, I applaud the work that the National College of Ireland are doing, but this idea of making an actual entire college dyslexic friendly, what does that mean, and what was it that led you to do that?
Okay, just to go back to some of the points that Lolly made, you've nailed it there, right? The first one is about neurodiverse and neurotypical.
Yeah.
I've always said, if I was diagnosed as neurotypical in the morning, I'd be devastated. Okay. But I think neurotypical, if it does exist, is such a narrow area that really is not somewhere that we should be encouraging people to do. And as Lolly said, education is catching up. Education is in that little narrow lane that is neurotypical. Maybe it's laziness, I'm not sure. NCI, yeah, we are diversity friendly. We're in particular autism friendly. We were the first autism friendly college in Ireland, and we have a dyslexia working group where we work with people who work to make the college dyslexia friendly, and we are very aware of diversity as it happens. And you come back to the HR directors. This is where I really feel strongly, and actually I'm working on a project at the moment to develop a micro-credential called Harnessing Neurodiversity in the Modern Workplace, because the modern workplace is missing out on neurodiverse people. Again, Lolly, sorry to go back to quote you, but you quoted the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
Okay, so the printing press happened.
Yeah.
Before the printing press happened, dyslexia didn't exist because the written word wasn't the means of communication. But actually, dyslexia did exist because people who were dyslexic, it didn't demonstrate itself, but their skills and their differences were recognised, and they were able to perform in particular jobs or particular areas. So that's an important point. Like, we could blame Gutenberg for dyslexia, but actually all he did was created the manifestation for it.
Yeah.
We're heading, and I'm not sure, you'll tell me, is it the fourth or fifth industrial revolution we're heading? The fourth, yeah. I've seen the fifth. It's like three.
That's the fifth dimension.
It's like 4G, 5G, and they're talking about 6G. Well,
I feel like I've lived through all of them, to be honest with you.
But we're moving into the fourth industrial revolution. Okay, machine thinking is happening. Yeah. Lots of decisions are being made for us. Programmed decisions, thankfully, are being made for us. Okay, Amazon are looking now at having the stuff on the way before we order it. Okay, that's not a big step because you just look at your social media, what's popping up. Simply, we're building a shed at home at the moment, and we're both being bombarded with possibilities for storage in sheds. Yeah. That's fabulous, okay? And the next step is to say, do you know what, we deliver it out. And if you don't want it, send it back. Yeah. So that whole decision, that whole process is replaced by AI, okay? But what we need then behind all that is people who think differently.
100%.
And neurodiverse people think differently. Yeah. I'm in the dyslexia bracket. ADHD, you mentioned ADHD. There's a little bit of a hierarchy in neurodiversity as well. There's a little bit of snobbishness, right? Our autistic cousins tell us all we're not neurodiverse at all. I was told by an ADHD person recently, dyslexia, that's not really neurodiverse. Big link between the two. In fact, I don't know, are they different at all? I just think my grandson is autistic and ADHD. Now, he reads really quickly. Okay, he can read. If he picks the book up upside down, he doesn't bother to turn it. He just reads it upside down. So his manifestation isn't in reading, where mine is.
Yeah.
And using my grandson again as an example, and it's okay to mention brands, is it?
Oh yeah, I'll go for it.
So the Irish Times. The Irish Times have I listen to the Irish Times every day. I listen to it, listen to all the articles. I listen to them at double speed, okay, because that's the way my head works.
Yeah.
I could not listen to them at single speed. I'd be gone, lose interest immediately. But I'm listening out loud in my bedroom recently to an Irish Times article, and my grandson came in. He said, "How can you listen at that speed?" I said, "The same way you can read at the speed you can read at."
Yeah.
So we both play to our strengths. Okay, and then just accommodations. Then we talk about accommodations. Reasonable accommodation is yesterday's news. Okay, that was a stepping stone towards embracing diversity. We forget about accommodations. We in the neurodiverse world are making accommodations for the non-neurodiverse world every day. Yeah. And the other one, you say making a reasonable accommodation. Just think about this in the workplace. We've all been in the workplace, okay? Think about all the times you have to make unreasonable accommodations for the person who can't take criticism, for the person who, if you don't say hello to, they get upset. Okay, they're unreasonable accommodations, and we seem pretty good at making those. Yeah. But reasonable accommodation, yesterday's news. The Irish Times, I've been a fan of the Irish Times for years. I'm now listening to it every day, listening to the articles, and that works for me. Somebody else mightn't listen. My wife can't listen to it. How can you listen to it? But so she reads it. So the world is changing. Fourth Industrial Revolution is making it that it isn't about organisations saying, we have to do the right thing and have 10% neurodiverse in our payroll. Yeah. It's organisations saying, you know what? We need people who are neurodiverse. Another company, Salesforce, about a year ago advertised for apprentice computer programmers. Interestingly, you mentioned that earlier. And they said people with dyslexia are encouraged to apply. And yes, there are certain parts. Problem solving is something that comes well to neurodiverse people. I worked as a computer programmer, called a software developer now, in the early 80s. And I worked as part of a group of computer programmers. Boy, was it diverse. Definitely dyslexia. I now know there was autism in the room. And a big level of left-handedness. And left-handedness is another diversity.
And creative brain thinking.
Yeah. And listen, we weren't allowed to be left-handed in 1960s Ireland.
Yeah,
that's right.
So it wasn't acceptable. Whereas we need to encourage left-handedness and see what can be brought to that.
And it's so true. You know, it's both of you have touched on the point about the difference between neurodiverse and neurotypical and how kind of ridiculous it is. And I always struggled with it. And the first time Lolly and I sat on stage working together, I spoke about this. The thing that I couldn't get my head around was this concept that 20% of the population were neurodiverse, which meant that the other 80% were typical, all the same, normal.
Average.
And I never worked with two people who were the same in my life, you know. But what I find fascinating now, and Lolly, I want to ask you a question that's kind of in relation to AI. What I find fascinating is if we start to acknowledge difference, if we start to understand that instead of difference being this is the problem we have to solve for, what if this is the thing that's going to make us thrive? And I found, if I can use sports for a second, with the sports teams I worked with, the best teams are the teams who had all sorts of different thinkers. If you think about, just say, for example, the Irish rugby team at the moment who are playing phenomenally well. You have players who are designed to play in the front row. You have players who are designed to play in the backs. You've got a kicker. You've got players who catch the ball out of the air. You know, you've got players who all have different skills. That team wouldn't function if everyone in the team was exactly the same. And yet in the workplace, we've from the Industrial Revolution, we built this uniformity for various reasons. The original Industrial Revolution that's what it was designed to do, is to create factory workers and people to go to war. But with regards to the new revolution, Lolly, and instead of us, we don't have time to go down the whole AI good, AI bad, because
it's pointless anyway.
It is pointless anyway, because there's so many. There's so many arguments in favour of both statements.
It's a tool. It depends how we go with it. Yeah.
But if you're If you're using AI for good in neurodiversity, where's the starting point? What do you see as being the kind of the excitement, I suppose, in what's out there?
Can I take you back to so I'm an anthropologist in innovation, right? And the one thing that I know to be true beyond anything else in innovation is the more diverse the team, the better the innovation. So when companies are saying, oh, we'd like to be more innovative to survive, which they need to be, they roll out a homogenized team of everyone that thinks the same. So that's the first mistake.
And can I just on that, and sorry for interrupting you, but this is really something I'm passionate about. What's never acknowledged is that the C-suite, so the people who make decisions in organizations, typically come from legal backgrounds, accountancy backgrounds.
Right.
In occupations that are clearly designed for people who work really well with numbers and with detail and with passing exams. The medical industry is another industry that I would love to see the research on. I'm just purely going on opinion here. But another industry that is, I would say, is very heavily neurodiverse, because when you're if you think about it, I suppose the channeling your attention down.
I can tell you for 100% sure that's a fact, right? So people especially people in the first response units, have one of the highest levels of ADHD, because their brains respond incredibly well to stress and they can make decisions very, very quickly. So you've got first responders, very high levels of ADHD. You've also got entrepreneurs, around about 80%, because they think differently, join the dots differently, et cetera, et cetera. So you've also got stand-up comedians and sports people.
That's right.
Right? So, but if you look at the other side of that, you've also, and I did some work, as you know, in Liverpool with the Ministry of Justice, and they were looking at first-level statistics on how many people within the British prison system had ADHD, and it was incredibly high numbers. So what you're saying then is potentially, it's not the neurodiversity that you've got, it's how you are channeled and how you are helped to understand how best to channel it. Because you can succeed incredibly well. Some of the most successful people in monetary terms have ADHD, Richard Branson, for example, et cetera, with another person who has dyslexia. And by the way, most neurodiverse have more than one neurodiverse category. And then you've got, and so you've got that level, but you've also got the prison system and the police system also dealing with very, very high numbers because of the fact that people with ADHD speed more, because they're thrill seekers, because they're risk takers, and they also may make very quick impulsive decisions that may be detrimental to them.
Also, and are disenfranchised
and incredibly high levels of addiction as well. So you've got both sides. So it's got to be that our role is in helping redefine the education system. So for example, imagine guidance counsellors. Imagine a guidance counsellor says to you, okay, this is great, you have neurodiversity, and then it's in this particular category and this particular one. Well, these are some of the roles that we should be thinking about guiding you towards, rather than your family wants you to be a lawyer. And by the way, on your previous point, lawyers and doctors are the two highest suicide rates.
Wow.
And they're people that shouldn't be in those roles, that their family want them to be in those roles. So it's about this nuanced idea of, if I know how well I can operate and flourish, in what particular area will I flourish with those skills? It's a round peg, square hole situation, and with the right encouragement and with the right mentorship potentially and opportunities, the whole world could be transformed for people that are neurodiverse.
And the issue is, from my perspective, just when you were talking about the need for innovation, that there's so little evidence of innovation at the decision-making level in organizations, and corporate organizations especially. And what you have in most corporate organizations is an echo chamber of people who do the things the way you want them to do it, that you promote.
Which is the opposite of innovation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Dave, with that in mind, and when we think about where we're coming from, and it's amazing that we think about, the development in society and all the different kind of areas of knowledge and how new understanding difference is as a conversation point. What do you think is what do you think is the big challenge, kind of the next big challenge, to try and get organizations to embrace difference? Because my understanding of what I've seen is that it's people acknowledge we need to do something about this. but they have no clue where to even start, and they end up ticking boxes rather than actually making change. So where do you see the particularly for the corporate world, we'll say, where do you see the gain?
The biggest fear in organizations is fear of difference. And neurodiversity is different. Okay, we have come a long way in Ireland in the acceptance of societal differences, of intellectual differences, of ethnical differences. And we need to move now to neuro differences and just acknowledge and accept that. And I think in the end of the day, corporations are realists. Okay, so the realization needs to be that we are not going to continue to succeed in this world because our competitors are going to do something different. And we need to harness that. And it's about harnessing the diversity in the potential employees. And like we talked about ADHD, and like it's the attention, the concentration of attention that someone with ADHD can have. If we can tap into that, we can achieve huge results. I don't know if you've ever witnessed a first responder reporting to a doctor. I mean, it is a phenomenal piece of communication. So you come on an accident, first responder, doctor doesn't say a word. First responder says, I came on the scene, the crash is this, I checked the neck, I did this. And there is an understanding and a communication between the two. And the first responder with ADHD can do that because that's a concentration of attention. Attention deficit. It's a concentration of attention.
It's neither a disorder nor a deficit.
Absolutely not. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and we need to harness that in organizations. Yes, we need people at the C-suite who can evaluate and take forward what's going to work or what's not going to work. If we look, you say like 40% of self-made millionaires have dyslexia. That's a fact. But 40% of the prison population have dyslexia.
Yes, exactly.
Your point again, right? And I'll give you an example. You mentioned, Lolly, education, industry, and government, okay? And there needs to be a synchronized approach between the three. And Ireland can gain from this. Our education system, I work on it, it's absolutely, utterly broken. Okay, we continue to pursue the Leaving Cert. Perfect example. It's in the news at the moment. The Irish language. Irish language is, I'm pretty okay with the Irish language because I learned to speak it when I was young. I cannot read a word of the Irish language. Okay? But why do I need to read it? So we have a beautiful language that could be alive, but we're slowly strangling it by putting people into positions where they learn stuff off by heart. Like an essay. A Leaving Cert essay is supposed to be a thing of beauty, a thing of creativity. Students learn the essay by heart, throw down the sentences, and cannot speak a word of the language afterwards. And that's what our education system is doing.
Absolutely.
The point system is owned by the CAO is owned by the universities. It's a lazy way of selecting people to do courses because if we want to pick the right person to be a doctor, we have to put a bit of effort in. It's much easier to say, oh, he has 500 points, he's going to be a great doctor. That's not always the case.
It also doesn't take into consideration EQ, like emotional quotient, and intelligence, like kind of which people who are in the neurodiverse scale have enormous spades of. So you're looking at all these different types of intelligences. You're also looking at within the neurotypical population, you've got people that are kinesthetic learners, auditory learners. You learn by looking, hearing, seeing. You talk about you're listening to podcasts or audiobooks. So that's also in the neurotypical category as well. So perhaps we could end up with a scale or a spectrum whereby we say, I like this and this works for me and this doesn't work so well for me. And can I have an education system that's designed around that? And the answer is coming as yes. Through AI and these personalized applications, you absolutely can. You can have, instead of having a university professor, you can have the same wording coming through an avatar, perhaps, that works well for you to listen to, a cute cat or whatever it is. It's still giving you the same information. You can access it 24 hours a day. It can be personalized to what you like. There will be polls and games and other things that will work if that's what you enjoy. And the learning experience will be different. So part of what we saw during COVID in the third level sector was that some we went online obviously overnight. So some lecturers were able to make experiential education. Other lecturers just photocopied. Some of those were like transparencies from the old days on the overhead projectors, or they photocopied books, textbooks, and sent them as slides. That's not teaching. We have got lazy, I completely agree. And I think that students in their day-to-day lives, they are using multimodal engagement across many, many devices. They come into the university and it's death by PowerPoint, if they're lucky. So this idea of emergent experiential learning, small pods, no big lecture halls, but that's got to start right from primary.
And they're told to turn their phones off.
Yeah.
The biggest, most amazing research tool that they could ever have is in their hand.
Yeah.
And they're told to turn it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And let's face it, that's so. Like I've been experimenting with assessment. Last year, I asked a group to do an assessment, use AI, and give me the AI output,
Yeah.
and then give me your version of that.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah.
And that's it's just so simple.
Well, we can't put our head in the sand and say the university system say we're banning it, or it's outlawed. It's going to be used anyway. So even if you use ChatGPT, I use ChatGPT as a thought prompter, which is amazing, and it helps me think when I'm at, I've got that blank page syndrome, right, which so many of us have. But you can't just translate that and put that in as your essay because it'll be picked up anyway. But you can put it through a couple of other applications and it won't be picked up yet. So it's in a way what we're looking at with AI at the moment is people going, oh, ChatGPT, that's cheating. I'm like, is a calculator cheating?
No,
when was the last time did you do long division?
Is reading a book cheating?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
No, it's something. Actually, there's something you said recently that springs to mind, and forgive me now if I butcher the quote, but it was diversity of thought is the ultimate advantage in bias mitigation.
100%.
Talk to me about that.
Okay, so bias mitigation. At the moment, we've got algorithms that are biased because they're based on everything that we've put into it, and we are biased ourselves as human beings. So we are racist, sexist, homophobic, et cetera, in various dosages. And all of that is in the internet as well. All of that is part of what's being fed in. So all of our sort of more negative attributes as human species are also in there. But also the other thing is that we can, if we work with a more diverse group to look at the biases, and we know that, for example, facial recognition at the moment is working against people of colour. And this is particularly of interest at the moment in Ireland because our response to the Dublin riots was to give the police to be allowed to have facial recognition software. It's flawed. It's very, very flawed. So we're now going to have to deal with the output of that. But what is really exciting is about people that have got this different level of focus and that think differently can mitigate against the biases because they'll be able to think around them. So it's not just about the fact that most of Silicon Valley might have autism. We don't know. It's about the fact that we'll be able to move in and mitigate against the biases because we'll have people that can think differently. And so actually, I do foresee a future whereby people that have a neurodivergence, which we've just said is everybody, but people that are more on the spectrum of various neurodivergence will actually be more applicable in the future and in the world that we're looking at in terms of will be more useful, more valuable.
Indeed, I can see people faking neurodiversity in the future.
I want to be part of the club.
But that actually, you say that as a joke, but
it's not.
But I was at an ADHD conference in Liverpool last summer, and there was definitely people in the room who were wearing it as a badge of honor, and definitely I got the sense there was some people in the room who wanted to be angry with the world about something. And this is the latest thing to be angry about. And I just found it fascinating because that's not my experience of how I've kind of dealt with and understood my... And I think you're right. I mean, I think I'd say if I was to go and sit down and start looking at kind of dyslexia and looking at various maybe autism spectrum, and Shem, our lovely producer, I think on a daily basis questions my... how far down every spectrum I am, but it's my relationship with it is one of fascination and of almost excitement about A, I understand more about myself, and B, well, how do I harness this to make me better? And there are things that having ADHD make me better at. Like, for example, I could be handed a topic 5 minutes before I go on stage in front of a room full of people, and I can talk about it. Because it's just, part of ADHD is you thrive when you're in the most stressful situations. Give me 3 months to prepare that topic for a talk, and I'll still be preparing it 5 minutes before I go on stage, which is another nightmare for Shem.
But you know why you developed that? You developed that because we've actually got evolutionary research now in terms of anthropology to say that people with ADHD actually were related back to the original hunters. So this is why you have a hyper focus, but only for a short period of time, and and then it's gone. So your reward system is in the hunt. And it's also why there's linkages to people with ADHD who may be dairy intolerant and need more protein in their diet. And that's because you weren't in the villages, you were moving around. It's also why you shouldn't be sedentary. So there's amazing research coming out now to say these evolved as benefits. What we did, and we also thought that it was along the male line. We now know that's true. So people go, oh, well, it can't be true because women have ADHD. No, there was actually equal numbers of male and female hunters. We found that from the size of their pelvis and the recent sort of, carbon tracing. So what's fascinating is if it's in terms of evolution, in terms of ADHD, if it's meant to be there, we can see why certain people are moving forward in certain directions and other people who don't get that encouragement will actually fall by the wayside. Part of the biggest challenge we have in not just in education, but in society coming up is misinformation and discernment of thought. So we need to start thinking in a world where everything can be faked, and we don't know what's true. The people that have that ability to focus in and really go into something in depth will be the people that will be able to discern fact from fiction. We also are the people that will be able to join the dots of different things that aren't necessarily connected. That's going to be one of the most useful skills that we have in more of an AI world, because the AI will only be machine thinking, machine learning. It's not going to be empathetic. It's not going to be able to join dots between things that aren't necessarily connected. But if you have ADHD, you can. And that's a huge skill.
Huge.
That's really interesting because risk taking is associated with ADHD.
Exactly right.
Amazing, yeah. Now, just coming back to women and girls, I think it's important too that yes, there are equal amounts of diversity. My theory, not necessarily rooted in research, is young girls are born to mask in life, and then they mask ADHD, dyslexia, and autism as well, and that's something. And maybe now that we're having the talk about, what happens to young girls. Maybe that openness will open up society and give the opportunity to young girls to actually not mask their diversity, and we get much richer society.
Well, we talk about celebrating difference, but we don't do it.
No.
And we don't even understand what difference might mean. In terms of thought leaders, people that are neurodiverse are right up there. Mm-hmm. So why is it we pretend the whole world is operating on a better system of neurotypical?
In fact, not so much thought leaders, but in terms of thinking. And, I'll watch lots of podcasts on dyslexia, obviously, and ADHD, but I've noticed now a common thread throughout the dyslexia world is we write poetry. And I kind of, why is that? What happens? Poetry is defined as an economy of words.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
And it's also, you come back to your EQ, it's also defined as the shortest distance between two people.
Yeah.
And 4, 5, 6 different webinars or podcasts I've looked at in recent times involve, and I've done one myself where I've read some of my poetry, involve a dyslexic person reading poetry. It's kind of, why do we do it? It's in there, it's within us.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
It is. And I'm sitting here just losing myself in the, and I'm I'm supposed to be hosting. But one thing I think is really interesting, and Lolly, you touched on it briefly at the start, is and what I'd like to do, what I'd love for this conversation to kind of, for the takeaway from it, to be if somebody's in a workplace and they're thinking, because it is, if you don't understand all this stuff and you don't understand how to implement it, and it's like I do a lot of leadership training stuff, and companies, they all have an ideal of what they want to be. But if the culture is completely broken at the start, you can do all the fancy leadership training you want, but it's not going to make an ounce of difference because the culture is broken. So I'd love for somebody who really wants to make a difference and embrace difference, to have something they could take away. And one of the things I think is really cool is you were talking about the tools that AI allow to kind of, I suppose, to allow difference to express itself. And you were talking about like VR skills training and things like that. Like, can you tell me a little bit about kind of the tools that companies can use, or even like personal workstations and things, like what are the tools that companies can use to, that it's not that difference is the problem, but that it's, let's celebrate this thing and figure out how this helps us thrive and innovate and be better.
Well, for example, if you're thinking somebody has to log on at 9 and log off at 5, right? That's not going to work for some people that are neurotypical, right? So if you can hyper focus and you can do your work in 4 hours, then you should be able to be doing that, because it's about productivity, right? So that there's certain time boxing tools, there's other things that are incredible to work with. It's about, sensory experience for a lot of people, and I'm not talking about every office has to be neon lit, but let's face it, overhead lighting doesn't work for anybody. In terms then of other accommodations, I do a lot of my meetings walking now, so I've got headphones on and I'm walking, and people are like, oh, where are you? And I'm like, it shouldn't even be a thing, because I actually think better when I'm walking and I'm moving.
But there's the assumption that you're not in the office, you're not
right,
doing work.
The assumption that you're out doing something, so we know about walking desks and everything else. We evolved as human beings to move, all of us, but some of us that are neurotypical have evolved to need to move more. And so as a consequence, how do we move within that thing? So a little bit like the return to work and putting people back in their boxes, in their offices. This isn't going to work for the people of for the workplace of the future. And it's not, there's so many amazing tools being developed. And so students that I know in UCD developed, they're called BioWave. And they developed, as a gorgeous story, is an engineering student, and he had been school friends with a girl, and they parted company, and then they met at a gaming conference, and he was an engineer, and she had she had a disability, and she couldn't use her arm in the same way that other people could. And they just sat and talked at this gaming conference, and she said, how annoying it is, this controller's not working for me. And he said, well, I'll make you one. That was the basis of BioWave, and they've gone on now to make this sort of cubic controller that you can transform for gamers right across the world. That's now incredibly being applauded and being done, and loads of people are trying to copy. It's about the difference that they had and the problem that they were trying to solve together. My biggest fear is that with every sort of economic change, and perhaps with the political change in the States and everything else, the very first thing to go will be the diversity, inclusion, and equality budget. It always is. It's the very first thing, and people go, oh, we don't have time or money for these, these accommodations. There's plenty out there that's open and free source, that open source and free, that people can use. But it's more about the freedom of how would you like to work. And if you're being productive, then why would it matter? So I think it's going back to thinking differently and seeing it differently, rather than putting me in an overhead strip lit box and expecting me to check in and check out, because that's my worst nightmare. It won't work for me.
That's a huge positive outcome from COVID.
Yeah.
And that was like the concept of remote working. We can be where, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But what we sometimes forget, we can also be when.
Yeah.
And you know what? If your hyper attention spot is 3 o'clock in the morning,
right?
Hey, go for it.
Right.
Use that spot. And
it's working for people now with global reach, because they're working on what's called an asynchronous disengagement, which is across time zones. So why shouldn't it work within one country?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And like I'm very lucky. Don't think about just say organizations. Now, organizations, what we do is we work to the strengths of our products, we work to the strengths of our people, we work to the strengths of our machines. So let's work really to the strengths of our people. And like you said about Messi is a great footballer, but 11 of them out there is not going to work. Mm-hmm. So if you've got someone at the C-suite, as you mentioned earlier, they need to work to their strengths, and to the strengths of the people who report to them, and between them to achieve results. And I found in my career where I worked with somebody or to somebody who played to my strengths and allowed me to play to their strengths, it worked very well. I'm not very good at composing, but I'm very good. This is unreal as a dyslexic, but I'm quite a good proofreader, and I'm quite good at rearranging text to make it that bit better. And I worked with a manager once who wasn't great at the construction of words, but he would get the ideas, and I tidy it up. And he said, "God, that's fabulous." And well, actually, I just do what I do. I think you did a great job coming with the ideas. So it's about playing to the strengths of individuals, and let's get the team together And if we can do that and lose the fear of somebody being different or doing something in a different place at a different time or differently.
I mean, you can see how that fear is manifesting. It's not working for organizations, but it's also working in the fact that huge numbers of people that are neurodivergent, because they have this label, are actually now feeling shame and they're not disclosing at work. So they don't disclose why. That's the culture. That's the thing that's got to change. So if there was no, if the disclosing didn't have a consequence that you were passed over for promotion or seen as difficult, or, oh God, you need different lighting or this, that, the other. If we just had a different view of the way that we're different, that actually we properly celebrated it, but actually realized that, and this is the bottom line for the C-suite, we realized that we would be A, more innovative, B, probably still be in existence in years to come, but also be more productive and therefore more financially viable. So if you're cutting your diversity budget, that's the worst thing you can do.
Your competitive edge could depend on that
absolutely.
diversity.
And it's interesting. I had a conversation recently with a guy who runs one of the biggest, or if not the biggest, global takeaway chain, shall we say. And obviously, because of the nature of their business, they employ a lot of very young people. And they employ a lot of people with challenges that, typical challenges, shall we say. And one of the conversations we had that I found really fascinating, and it's not directly linked to neurodiversity, but it's more linked to difference of thought. The managers in that organization that are really good are really struggling right now because the organization have brought in this new diversity charter, and they're doing a different way of handling things. And every manager is afraid of being called a bully or whatever if they try to push people to work harder or whatever. But what I found really fascinating was that what they're discovering is the new generation of kids coming into the workforce are so comfortable talking about their mental health and their emotions. And even a manager who's only 4 or 5 years older doesn't know what to do with that. So they're in this kind of place where they're like, what am I going to do? So now they're going to go, the best thing I can do is avoid that conversation. So now your good managers are ceasing to manage the people, so that the good managers are letting the standards drop. So which means, you follow the logical flow, the standards drop across the board, right? We had this conversation, and for me, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, but for me, there was 2 things I said to him. One was this embracing of the thought, like difference of thought. And then the second thing is, when you're talking about, like just say in the service industry, VAT rates have gone up, minimum wage has gone up, margins are being really squeezed. Everybody, there's a lot of restaurants and coffee shops who are actually doing well are closing down because it's just not in their interest anymore, right? So it's a difficult environment they're working in. But from my perspective, if you don't invest in those good managers now, that's the future. Like, that's why a lot of these places are going to close, because if they haven't embraced the challenge, where are we going to go? So,
but I think it's a lot of things you said there, Niall, right? The first one is about the managers managing the people, right? Managers should manage themselves and processes. They should lead people.
Yes.
And that simple move from managing people to leading people. And that is getting people to achieve to their potential, giving them the opportunity and allowing it to happen. And that simple mindset shift, there's no fear then. And as you say, it's a joy. I don't know if you work with undergraduate, first year undergraduates, it's a joy. The openness, they like think about us, you're a lot younger than I am, but like somebody who was gay when I was in school was, woo! There's just no inhibitions at all now. Absolutely. No inhibitions about anything, and that's good. And managers need to become more leaders than managers. Yeah, manage yourself, manage the process.
We've been talking about authenticity at work for decades, but we didn't mean it.
No, exactly.
Now,
to be fair, I've worked with some people, and the last thing you want is their authentic self.
But isn't authenticity knowing yourself? And if you know yourself, bringing yourself to work for there's no fear of recrimination for you being you. And so, where does this stigma come from? So again, and this has got to feed into the lack of diversity that we have in our leadership, but also certainly in our founders and our CEOs. This afternoon, I was at a previous talk where we were saying we're still around the 20% mark, even for women. So if we're talking about intersectionality, it's 2% for women of color. And then if we were talking about intersectionality of neurodiversity as well, so right across the board, we have a non-diverse workforce, yet in some industries like construction or other industries is incredibly diverse. So what is it we're doing with our private and our public companies that we're actually still thinking about, boardrooms being, you and I have talked about this, about sort of quotas or aspirations or margins, in terms of that. We need diversity all the way through from middle management, and it needs to be encouraged all the way through, and diversity of thought as well as all the other forms of diversity.
And can I ask you, Dave, because I 100% agree with what Lolly just said, but one of the areas that seems to be the most strikingly in need is the recruitment industry. And I've seen the way recruitment is done and the tests and the different ways that people have to jump through hoops to get a job and the way they identify talent. And it's all algorithms. But a lot of the time you're doing you have to do these different kind of assessments and stuff. And it's very much, again, aimed at what we would have dismissed at the start as being neurotypical, right? What are your thoughts on that? How do we achieve change in the environment if we can't even get people in the door to have an interview?
Okay. We need to stop thinking of people as carbon units.
Yeah.
Okay. You can't just plug one out and plug another one in. Okay. So if the hard disk goes in your laptop, you can plug it out, plug another one in. Yeah. But an employee is very different. And each job, like the recruitment industry, is working to what it's been asked to do, okay, which is just to throw people at problems, okay, rather than analysing what do we need. So, let's face it, go back to Business 101, right? What is the specification of the person you need? What is the job that you need filled? And then design the job around that, and then try to match an individual to that. It may involve psychometric testing. It may involve some form of interview. But we need to it's laziness again. It's about throwing people at a problem. And I don't know, I've done a couple of interview panels recently where I've been given a list of questions. We should just give them all the list of questions, tell them to give us written answers. I mean, an interview panel should be about a discussion, about you kind of get into the person's head, see what's going on there. But now we have to be able to prove that we did the same thing with everybody. So that means the good old-fashioned interview is dead in the water. It doesn't allow somebody to shine.
Yeah.
And there is another difficulty, and this is long recognised.
And actually, that's a great point, because in an interview, and I found this, that I can sit and talk to anyone about anything. Put me in an interview where I'm thinking about what are the answers they're expecting to hear, and I really struggle. And that's a really
just think of what
one.
you've done there, right? And
Yeah.
this is a societal problem. You're thinking about the answers you think they want to hear. Just think of all the decisions that you've made there, right? First of all, you've decided what they're thinking, right? then you've interpreted what they're thinking and presented something that you think will match what they think.
Yeah.
And it's just it's bizarre and that's what we're doing. That stems all the way back to our education system, where we're focused on learn something off by heart and do it. There is one slight one in and this goes back to recruitment back in the people do tend to recruit people like themselves.
Yeah.
There's a security
And
in that.
promote.
Yes, absolutely. So then you get floating up to the top of an organisation, like-minded white men with suits and ties. And that's what's happening.
Pale male and stale.
Pale male
it's
and
called.
stale, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we just step back from it and radically change what we're doing. We've been doing it for hundreds of years, and it doesn't work.
No.
And, there's a radical change needed. Education, industry and government. Now, in fairness, and you mentioned I work in Trinity, I work with people with intellectual disability in Trinity in the School of Education there on a programme, and it's the most rewarding work I've ever done. The Simon Harris, in fairness, the Minister for Further Education, is funding those initiatives. Yeah. He announced lots of funding recently for and what we're saying now is that people with intellectual disability have a place in meaningful employment. And I was at a conference in EY some weeks ago, and they have 8 of the graduates from Trinity working there, and they will say without doubt the impact on the team and on the organisation is always positive. EY also, they get diversity. They've also stopped asking for results. So you go to apply for a job in EY, you say, I've got a BA in economics. They say, grand.
Yeah.
That's all we want to know. Now let's talk to you. And the thing is, and just my own, just a little bit selfish on the dyslexia side, if you have somebody with dyslexia coming in with a 2-2, and you have someone who doesn't have dyslexia coming in with a first, the person with the 2-2 may have done a lot more work to achieve that 2-2 and may have taken an awful lot more from the course.
Yeah.
And that's what needs to be recognised. I was away for a weekend with a group recently, and there's a guy I did my MBA with back 1996, and he said something, and I said, oh yeah, Ricardo Semler. And he, who? I said, he wrote a book called Maverick. He said, did you read it? I said, no, because I didn't. But I said, you did. And he said, no, I never heard of it. I said, it was the course reader on our creativity module. Well, then he said, absolutely, would have read it at least twice. I never read it. I can quote from it. He read it and could quote verbatim for it 3 weeks later in the exam.
But not now.
He's forgotten it.
Yeah.
Whereas the impact on me of him really, because he would talk to me about it and I'm taking it in and I remember. So, you know, that's how lame our system is. Yeah. Short term, immediate, and we need to move on. So we need radical change in how we recruit and radical change in how we run businesses and step back from the fear. Ben Doan, who died recently, I didn't realise Ben was dyslexic. And his famous statement was, he never failed an exam in his life. He never took an exam in his life. But he certainly built an amazing empire.
He did.
Yeah.
And
great man to spend time with, actually.
Really, yeah, really good guy.
Man, yeah.
But I only found out at his funeral, actually. I heard people speak about his dyslexia. Yeah.
I think I had a gorgeous phrase the other day, and I'm going to steal it because it's human being, not human doing. And I thought, oh God, yes, that's exactly right. Like, kind of, we have been human doing for a really long time in the corporate world, and now it's time to be human being.
What a fabulous place to leave it. Honest to God. I mean, but as soon as we get into education, I think there's so many different roads we could go down, and we could be here for, and maybe there's an episode 2 and 3 of this conversation, because it's fascinating. But Lolly, Dave, thanks so much for being so generous with your time. It was a brilliant conversation. Really looking forward to getting feedback from people when they hear it. And we'll just keep championing the difference.